Help capture the history of our markets by contributing to the John Lothian News GoFundMe campaign to support the Markets Wiki Education history-focused video series and more.
If you just imagine like the data room in Cannon Bridge, which is where LIFFE was based, like the primary one, you know, there was this like big open space and there was this one huge cabinet stacked in the middle, and it just had massive air conditioning being piled onto it all day long to try and keep the thing cool. It was as it was whizzing round. I mean, you look at that now and you fast forward to where we are now, you know, you'd probably have something the size of like a photo frame doing exactly the same job as it was doing 21 years ago. But certainly, yeah, it was wrapped in cotton wool. But we were it was a constant battle with Sun to get them to produce something that would go faster, that was bigger, and had more processing power at the time. But yeah, it did take an awful lot of cooling, and yeah, it was wrapped in cotton wool to protect it. We were constantly having to do weekend working, weekend upgrades, keep improving things, keep adding bits of equipment into the network, you know, to whether it's switches, servers, whatever it happened to be. And for whatever reason, there was a critical piece of equipment hadn't been correctly cabled into like your standard sort of vertical APC power racks within a rack. And somebody I'd obviously run out of space because of the amount of work that was going on. And to be fair, at LIFFE at the time, that the data centers and the guys that ran it were spotless. You know, they were absolutely immaculate going back even those years. But for some reason, something had been plugged into like what was effectively a 13 amp socket on the wall. And so a BT engineer had come in to do a load of cabling work on some more circuits that were going in and needed some power for his equipment. So he just pulled this plug out, stuck his piece of equipment in, and again, all the lights went off. And it was just like, cracky, you know, what's gone wrong now? And then within like 5 minutes, we'd sort of traced the power all the way back and gone bang. Right, so message to oneself, never let anybody go in the server room unaided, you know, regardless of who they are and how much experience they've got. You know, it's always got to be two people in there, two people going, yes, can I do this? You know, going through the whole checklist. But look, you know, I suppose looking back, it's, you know, it's worrying now that could happen. But you've got to remember what life was like in the late 1980s. We've only got the standards around data centers, network equipment, everything else, because of all the lessons that, you know, you've learned the hard way over the years. And the great thing is with those incidents and problems, like you take them to every job that you have ever since, and you make sure you go, I'm not living through all that pain again of all the phones lighting up, hundreds of phone calls, all the problems, all the trades that have got to be unwound, you know, just because of a moment's slip in some sort of, you know, the lapse around operational controls, I guess, at that time that weren't obvious, but now it's very obvious. I think the most exciting is probably also with the most scariest and the most like one-off day that you could possibly imagine. So I think if you wind memories back, there was something, I think it was like, maybe it was May 99, May 2000, there was like a G5 summit in London, and London was being overtaken by the anti-capitalist protesters. And it, you know, I think if you Google it now, you'll see pictures all over the place. And what happened was probably around lunchtime, they were all beginning to converge on Cannon Bridge where the trading floor was. And we'd been out somewhere at lunchtime. We'd all got our jackets on, were coming in. But you could tell it was getting nasty. There was a hardcore group of people determined to have a go at the LIFFE building at that point. You could tell they were all properly armed up. There'd been I think it was Travis Perkins, from memory, the builders merchants. They'd had a lorry hijacked, and down the lower Cannon Street, they begin boarding up all the entrances with breeze block walls and blocking everything off. They started to set off all the fire hydrants, so the water was pouring into the basement, which is where we had all the phone systems. So we had to put the full BCP into place. So we'd sort of shut, I think, trading early, transferred everything onto the LIFFE Connect platform, or APT, which I think some of the products are still going on. So we had a team in the London Stock Exchange doing settlements. And now, of course, the problem is you had a few thousand people trapped in the building. We have a few thousand people, if not more, outside the building. And then all of a sudden, sort of the news came over the tannoy that the protesters had invaded the building. And for those people who'd been to the LIFFE building at the time, there was a huge set of escalators that came up to the atrium above Cannon Street Station. and the security guards were overwhelmed with what was going on. And it literally was hand-to-hand fighting to try and keep the Swampies out, as they were affectionately known. They'd all come up with their bats and their clubs and their hammers. They started smashing up all the escalators and working their way up to the top. And really, then we were on our own. There were no police. So across the tannoy came the message that can all the ladies in the exchange go to the back of the trading floor, and gents, if you're happy to come and sort of form a wall and a line to stop the guys coming in. It was a bad day. There's a lot of people got really upset and really nervous, but I suppose you had to do what you had to do. And, so a whole group of us all formed a line. Obviously there was a lot of fisticuffs going on with the trading and the LIFFE exchange sort of standing one side, and these guys wanted to come smash the office up. And I think when I go back and I talk about what an amazing place LIFFE was to work and how proud I am, to have had that company on my CV, you got to look at where are companies, right? So you can have employees over here and a company over here. And when they're far apart, you've got risk and you've got poor engagement. But when you've got high engagement between the company and the employees, that's when the employees will defend the company, they'll look after the company's property, the money, and that's when your risks drop. And it was a great day when everybody looked at everybody else and went, you know what? No one's coming up here smashing our place of business up. I don't care what the name of these guys are. So thankfully, what they didn't realise was there was a few thousand people at the top of the escalators and only maybe 100 or 200 of these guys coming up. So they were utterly overwhelmed and took a proper pasting until the Metropolitan Police were able to come through the ranks and basically arrest all of these guys who'd come up to cause all the trouble. There's a huge atrium. So there was 6 floors going up, and there were quite a few banks and other offices unrelated to the trading floor all up there. You could look up and you see all these people all staring down and obviously quite nervous and scared about, what these anti-capitalists are doing. So anyone who looks at the damage they cause when they smash up shop windows and when you're inside and this is going on, it's quite scary. And so look, the brilliant part was everybody on the floor, LIFFE and traders alike, came together, defended the building. The protesters were overwhelmed. The police eventually arrived and dealt with the situation and took them all out. And then, upon reflection, the next day at work, I remember thinking to myself, God, what were we doing? This is insane, dealing with what we dealt with at the time at the top. And one of the fellas, like Jim Stokes, came around, he's a floor observer guy, and he worked with us, and he came around and went, Bish, got to get some names together. The chairman wants to know who was involved in all the escapade that was happening at the top of the escalators yesterday. I was like, oh God, no, Jim, don't say anything. We're going to get fired, for what was going on yesterday. He goes, oh, don't worry, your name's already on the list. I was like, oh God. So anyway, that afternoon, there's me, Phelpsy, Wadey, a load of guys from the Futures Pit, Chucky. We all got called up to the chairman's office, and there was a guy called Scott Parker, who was a larger-than-life character, Chelsea fan, and he worked on the Futures side, he worked with us. And he was sat next to the chairman, and there's probably like a country mile difference between the two lives that the chairman and Scott Parker had led so far. But the chairman stood up and just thanked us all, and as chairman of LIFFE, for what we'd done to defend the company, sort of keep the lights on. We still managed to get all the settlements done. We still reopened the following morning despite all the damage and all the chaos, and we kept everything going. And it was probably one of my proudest days, oddly enough, to sort of sit there and go, that's brilliant that we've all come together as a group and bonded and dealt with what we've dealt with and just had to stand on our own 2 feet and to be recognised, probably unofficially, I guess, in the capacity of defending your company's business. But no, it's probably the most memorable day I've got from all my time at the exchange. So yeah, that's probably why I look back at it on fond memories. After the career finished on the floor, I did 3 years in the operations centre, and that was really overseeing, the bonds, the commodities, interest rates, etc., all migrating. That took around 3 years. That happened all the way through till 2001. And then once that was done, the guys, IT was a good 200 strong department. So I got the opportunity to go and work full time for them as a business analyst. So I was doing that for 3 months, and all of a sudden there's a chap called Gary Jordan, and he dealt with our sort of fellow exchange, Tokyo Futures Exchange, for some time. There'd been a cooperation agreement, etc., between the two exchanges, and he came back and he said to us, "Look, great news! We've managed to sell LIFFE Connect to the Japanese." And so he said, brilliant opportunity. And he said, right, who's going to go? And I thought, well, I would never stand a chance of that. It was one of those comedy moments, I think, when everyone else took a step back and I was the only one stood forward, not paying attention. And that was it. Next thing I know, that weekend I'm on a plane. Spent 6 months down in Japan. And I think it was a couple of years later, we finally got Life Connect live for the Tokyo Futures Exchange. And that was an amazing project. We were the first foreign exchange company to sell any technology into Japan. It was an industry dominated by the sort of NECs, Hitachi's of this world, and they had quite a few exchanges in Japan at that moment in time. And then really from there, I was very fortunate to have been posted by Life to all various other exchanges, including the Board of Trade, and I spent many a time over there, a guy called Andy Zupek, Julie Winkler, etc. Scott Kaufman, I could rattle off all the names. Many a time locked in offices and rooms and corridors over there with those guys as we, migrated their bond contracts onto there and all the future enhancements we had. So I was really lucky with that. Spent a lot of time working on clearing and settlement as well. And then I think it was probably around about 2007, Life started to go through all the acquisitions. So we were taken over, by what they eventually, I think it was the New York Stock Exchange in between. It was Euronext. There was a partnership with Atos Euronext as well. So there's lots of corporate activity. So, after 2007 and probably what was 13 phenomenal years, Life was really a brilliant company to work for. John Ford was one of the sort of mainstays of the guys who were there. He was an excellent chap to work for and a great Arsenal fan. So I always used to enjoy bumping into him at Highbury and at certain away games, that's for sure. And so then I had an opportunity and I moved down to the Middle East and started up an exchange down there, sort of mainly focused on Sharia trading, and then from there went on to work in a completely different industry, but went to work for a private family office, and they had a business mainly focused around payments and foreign exchange, sort of the equivalent of Travelex and Western Union. Did that for 5.5 years, a big operation there, and then moved over to Luxembourg, which was again completely different industry, and that was all corporate service provider. And here I am working from a largest firm in the British Virgin Islands, based upon corporate service. I think the one thing I'd look back at is people often say, well, how did you go from trading floor, derivatives, clearing, settlement, etc., into payments and foreign exchange, into corporate service? And I think the way I look back at it is that the lessons that you learn and the training you got and the encouragement, the empowerment, all those types of words that were bestowed upon you in the days as a life floor observer really set you up in life for, like you had a toolbox of how you go and handle problems and situations, getting parachuted into operations that need big transformation, they need change, they need reinvigorating. I think when you look at the volume of change that you went under at quite a young age and the responsibility you had, it did really empower you to get to where you are. I'm pretty confident, I wouldn't be in the job I'm in now doing the things I'm doing if I hadn't have survived probably that first 3 months of the probationary period on the training floor. We would often have 13 people join and 13 people leave within a week for floor observer positions. And there was always a sort of, if you ended up in the short Stirling on a Friday afternoon, you knew you were getting fired because that was the closest pit to the door. So that's where you got walked out of when you'd failed a probation, or whether you just weren't up to it after a week or two. But I think in those first 3 months, I barely slept a wink because it was such a stressful environment to have to go from like a nice job at the NatWest Bank where it was all quite 9 to 5 and very polite to surviving in there. But certainly once you'd survived, you got your head around everything that was going on. Life were a brilliant company that supported you, and they gave you the skills, they gave you the training. And I think it just propelled you on and on throughout your career. I mean, you'll see behind me, in between the picture of a palm tree and the local beach, I've got a couple of pictures from the floor because I need everybody in the business I'm in now to understand like where I've come from and what it was like, and that's why it is possible to do more than one thing at a time when you're trying to look at 100 different things and work out what in that nanosecond what's the right thing to go and do and report on. People I work with, I work with some fun, even at say my level, there's a guy called Pat Lindsay who sort of onboarding me with a lady called Pauline. They were like the first two people that sort of held my hand, if you like, on the first day. There's my boss, a fella called Paul Jackson. He was a smashing fella. Steve Swain, There was Mark Phelps, Scott Wade, Darren Butler, quite a few lads like that I worked with day in, day out. There were guys with amazing names. We had Poser's Pouch and Peter Crouch. We had Chucky. We had Moose. No one can remember why you called him Moose. It was just really the camaraderie of all the guys that you work with. A lady called Dawn Woolley, cracky, you'd never mess with Dawn. She used to run the BTP pit and stood on her own two feet dealing with everybody there. And I look back with such fond memories and the great nights out and the great times I had with everybody there. Every time I come back into London, I always try and pick up the phone and speak to one of the guys and see if somebody's free for beers. There's a guy called Mike Oswin, who was better known as Bingo. So everybody had a nickname, and everybody, I think, was just a really good sort of, what I would call lifelong friend. I could quite happily now bump into any of those guys. Another guy called Dangerous, because he was the least most dangerous guy on the planet. So just the comedy of everybody having nicknames. I was called 30 Seconds because I worked in a different pit every day. And one day I forgot that, the BTP shut at a different time from the footsie, and I called 30 seconds out to shut the pit early, and then that was it. No, all the traders in the pit never called me anything apart from 30 seconds. Well, they called me one or two other names that probably you don't want me to repeat on this clip, but so these things stick with you, throughout the whole of life. For me, it's probably the friendship of the people that I met while I was working on the floor, and then subsequently, at a more senior level as your career progressed through the operation, because it was you go through life in different firms, and there's like firms out there who promote HR engagement and employer of choice type of things, and companies going, they do all this work, they get the accreditation, and then they get the stamp as an employer of choice. But I think at times working for Life, the exchange itself, it literally was the employer of choice. They were really good and really looked after the people, and I think as a result, you stuck with people, and you've got a lifelong friends. I've had even people track me down on LinkedIn and go, Nick, you're in the BVI, or I've got something in Nevis, or all these obscure locations. Just and all of a sudden, it's great that somebody makes contact with you after 10 years to do them a favour and help them out with a problem they've got on this side of the pond.
John Lothian News would like to thank those individuals who have contributed to our Markets Wiki Education GoFundMe campaign. Their financial assistance allows us to produce and distribute videos like this for our Open Outcry Traders History Project or the Path to Electronic Trading video series. Join them in supporting John Lothian News, capturing the history of our industry.